Hi, I'm Sean,
I'm Rhonda.
and we're excited to be with you today to talk about some directions that God gives in Colossians chapter 3, specifically to husbands and wives. Let's talk about the directive that he gave to the husbands. He said, husbands, love your wives and be not bitter against them. When I read that, he said, don't be bitter. What you're going to say?
Well, I'm thinking about, women want to feel loved. So when he says to love the wife, I really believe it's from the perspective of the wife. Does she feel loved? And so knowing how to nourish and cherish a woman in such a way that she feels loved, and like Sean said, without the bitterness, you have to wonder, well, why did God address this with a husband?
Yeah. What makes a person become bitter? What makes a husband become bitter against his wife? And we were talking about that this morning, and that it could be by sometimes a emotional presentation. Maybe it was kind of harsh.
A lot of times we women who are the main ones who present issues, obviously those roles reverse in some marriages, but a lot of times we have a harsh startup. It comes across as abrasive. We're not really considering our presentation. Mm-hmm. Well, that can tempt a man to be bitter. There are a lot of things. There are ways we women innocently present, and a man, I believe the accuser of the brethren twists it to cause contention. And I believe in this instance that it's talking about right here, a man will be tempted to become bitter. But we know that bitter roots defile, and that it's not a godly thing to have bitterness toward or against another person. It shapes the way a man treats his wife when he allows himself to become bitter.
Bitterness would be a choice. When he gave that directive to not be bitter, obviously it is something that you can choose not to be bitter. And a lot of times what can prevent or help stop that from taking place? And so that can be obviously due to a misunderstanding, a need for a change in perspective, and me perceiving that something's taking place in an attacking way. A lot of times men have to watch out to not become defensive.
Right. And one thing that can really soften that and help that is when a man understands his wife is there to be a helper, an instrument that God would use, a vessel that God would use to work on him. And if a man is seeking that help, instead of the woman feeling left out of decision making and like it's out of balance in their marriage, that reduces a lot of poor presentation right there, because the man is initiating, hey, what do you think about this? What is your perspective on this that we need to make a decision here and we need to come into agreement, and we haven't yet. So we need to work on this. We need to pray about this. We need to see what the we looks like.
There needs to be an expectation that my wife or my spouse is going to have a different perspective than mine. Right. We're not always going to have the same perspective, and that is God intended that. And so I need to be prepared to embrace a different way of looking at something and blend with that.
I think a lot of people get offended that there's a different way of looking at something instead of welcoming it and saying, wow, that's not something that entered my mind. And I'm so glad it entered yours and that now you can bring this into the picture for us, and appreciative and grateful that there is more perspective than just what I can bring to the table.
I was just thinking a few minutes ago about the different substances. If you do any cooking, maybe mix up flour, baking powder, and salt. Okay, those are different substances. It could be like having a different perspective. And what is intended is to take different substances or different perspectives and blend them together. And what you achieve by blending the flour, the baking powder, and the salt together is a one unified perspective or approach.
I believe that the opposite of bitterness is love. I believe here he's showing the husband to choose love and not bitterness. And I think those two conflict with each other. And so I think when a man gets bitter and tends to withdraw, pull inside himself, go quiet, she feels isolated, she feels alone, she does not feel loved, I think they're opposites. And I think that the choice is, okay, I'm not going to be bitter. Instead, I'm going to respond in a way that makes her feel loved.
Mm-hmm. And what would be that response that a wife would interpret as love? And of course, this is going to vary, I think, in different relationships. But for husbands, for you to pursue finding out what behaviors do I do or refrain from doing that communicate to my wife that she feels loved. Doing a checkup periodically and saying, hey, how easy is it for you to submit to me? Am I making it challenging? And how well do you feel like I am loving you? And what can I improve on?
I think a lot of that can be summed up with, are two becoming one, or is one becoming the other? Very different for two to be one rather than for them both to become him or both to become her. God meant for us to become a good we. When I think about the bitter part, I think about when we eat a pecan and we get that little part between the pieces of the pecan, how bitter that feels. And, so we're taking something in, we're receiving something, and it does not set well, right? And what do we want to do? We want to get that out, but then we become hypervigilant. The next pecan, I'm really looking to make sure that there's none of that bitter part in there. So bitterness, you see what it can do. It can make us hypervigilant. Now we're looking for, I don't think that's pecan. I think that's part of that bitter part.
And it's an expectation that you have. If you eat a pecan, you're expecting something, right? You're expecting something desirable, something that doesn't hit that bitter part of taste in your mouth. And you're expecting, to be nourished. Instead, something hits it, kind of assaults your taste buds, and you immediately what? You're looking to spit it out.
And so I think it's got to do a lot with when he says don't be bitter, there's obviously a choice there to not be bitter. And so I think when something feels like it's bitter, there's an appearance. I think we have to decide, I'm not going to receive this and allow bitterness in me. I'm not going to allow root of bitterness, because that root of bitterness will produce a plant which produces fruit. And then the spouse is going to end up partaking of that bitter fruit. And that's what's going to be growing and thriving in the relationship instead of the fruits of the Spirit, the love, joy, peace, gentleness, self-control, and all of that.
Sometimes bitterness finds a place in the heart when we do not bring up issues that need to be discussed.
And we have to keep it clean between us. We don't allow the bad stuff to just build between us and create a distance. And we keep those things clear, and we really work to understand hearts, not assuming and putting our own twist on what we believe the other person said.
Well, we so enjoyed having a few minutes to talk with you about some of these important directives that God's given in His Word, specifically to husbands and wives.
Look for more videos. We have a lot of self-help things that we're putting there, and we hope that those things will be a blessing to you.
We hope to see you again soon.